heard it said, you're in for a treat, and that's a truism at today's Rotary, and I couldn't be more proud and honored to get to introduce our speaker, Stephanie Stuckey, because of watching her kind of meteoric rise throughout her career and into the position of CEO at the Stuckey's Corporation. You all know, it's a family name, right? It's a kind of a legacy, storied history of Georgia, a family that kind of reinvented the thinking of what the roadside experience might be at a time when people were just discovering the roadside experience in the 1930s. Her grandfather started the company, and it transitioned through him to a series of experiences with her father's running the company, and then it was purchased and owned by a number of other corporations, including pet products. You might all have a can of pet somewhere in the back of your pantry that's probably really been there a long time. And then it got kind of to the point where it wasn't sure it had a life. And Stephanie's dad, Mr. Stuckey, kind of approached Stephanie and said, would you like to buy it and become the new CEO of the family company? And that might sound intriguing on the surface of it. There's a lot of certain family nostalgia that comes when somebody does something like that. But I think it's important before you understand what Stephanie's going to talk about for me to tell you a little bit about the person that you're going to get to hear. And it's now in a rebound, which is really an important attribute that Stephanie brings to the table. She is a Georgian through and through, a Georgia grad, both undergraduate and law degree. She's worked as a trial lawyer. She worked as a state legislator. She worked in sustainability for the city of Atlanta. She ran an environmental law firm. And in all of that, and a number of other kind of adventures along the way, she decided to go ahead and purchase the company anyway. And she bought it out of what she would kind of think somewhat, unfortunately have to say, was a state of almost bankruptcy. She may tell this story again, but when she and I first sat down and she was telling me she was thinking she might want to buy the company, and what did I think of it, I asked to see the P&L statement. And there was a little bit of a pause. And then the next time we got together, she handed me some papers, and she showed me a number on the bottom line that she thought was pretty exciting until I explained to her that the parentheses around the number were a negative. So therein lies the start of the rebound turnaround of Stuckey's. She has lots of achievements behind her name and her pedigree, and it's all been on her excitement, enthusiasm, and entrepreneurship that's really made it possible. She's been named one of the most influential Georgians by Georgia Trend magazine, and just last week, for those of you who follow the Business Chronicle, Stephanie was named the most admired CEO of family-owned corporations in Georgia. So a round of applause just on that moment alone. She also serves on other corporate boards besides her own, constantly using that as an opportunity to learn from her peers and to partner with other companies that are doing things that match up with what she's doing. And you're going to get to hear her talk a little bit about that as she unfolds the reinvention, the revitalization of the Stuckey's Corporation. And when she's not running the rebound and pulling the company together, she's working with their shelling plant in Rennes and their distribution operations center in Eastman. And in the midst of all that, actually enjoys the road trip, traveling across the country. Her claim to fame is she's actually seen the largest ball of twine in the world. And with that, and no further ado, would you all help me welcome Stephanie Stuckey to the podium?
Thank you so much for that introduction, Paul, who has been such a dear friend and a mentor to me. Not only have I seen the world's largest ball of twine, I have also seen the Lunchbox Museum, which is in Columbus, Georgia. I've seen the world's largest brick made of bricks, which is in Montgomery, Alabama. And I have seen the world's largest rocking chair, which is in Cuba, Missouri. That's just to name a few. But when I'm not doing that, I have been busy running Stuckey's. So what I'm going to do, and Paul, because I'm not good with time, if you'll just let me know when it's 1 o'clock and I can bring you up, I'm going to start by giving you just a framework of what brought me here today on the stage. And then Paul and I are going to have not a fireside chat, we're going to have a roadside chat, right, Paul? And we'll talk a little bit about the business end of the Stuckey rebound. So this was me 25 years ago, and Theron Johnson will remember it because he was my political consultant, and I got him back when people could afford him. But thank you, Theron, for helping me. I served 14 years in the Georgia legislature, and then I became a member of the minority party and got redistricted 3 times and got pretty tired of that. And I had to pivot. And so I went to my passion, which was environmental advocacy, and I headed up an environmental law firm, and then I went over to the city of Atlanta, where I got to work with wonderful people like Dan Gordon and Paul Morris, and I was head of sustainability, and I absolutely love that. And then we had a change of administration, and I had to pivot again, and I was happily working at South Face Institute with my good friend Andrea Pinnabell, and I was off in my sustainability bubble, happily fighting climate change and saving the environment, when one day, actually the call, Paul, came from my dad's former business partner. I was minding my own business, and he said, "Stephanie, do you want to buy Stuckey's?" So my first reaction was not the reaction that it should have been, which was Paul's reaction, "Can I see the P&Ls?" And he alluded to this. I actually had to go get them for the next meeting with Paul. My first reaction was not, "Can I see the P&Ls?" My first reaction was I was totally flattered that they thought I was CEO material, because at all the family reunions, they called me the tree hugger eco-wacko. And I was like, oh my gosh, he thinks I can be CEO of Stuckey's. So I called my grandfather's other 7 grandchildren, my cousins and my brothers, and I said, hey, are y'all in on this with me? Let's do this together. Let's pool our resources. Let's buy Stuckey's. Let's save the family business. Well, it turned out, I'm number 5 of 7 grandchildren. They had called every other grandchild before me, including the youngest ones, and they had all passed. So that's when I went to Paul, and that's when I also went to Dan Gordon. And I remember Dan asking me, well, Stephanie, what is the EBITDA? I thought EBITDA was a Swedish rock band. I had to Google it during our conversation. You may not know that. I was like, remind me how you spell EBITDA? So that's how little I knew about business. And I went from all of that to this, right? To selling pecan log rolls at trade shows and wearing coonskin caps and rubber alligators and wearing shirts that say eat here and get gas. Yes, that's part of the branding, right? So right after I bought the company, Maria Supporter actually wrote the first article, and it was very flattering, and she got her facts right. But then the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wrote an article, and the headline was a little misleading because it says, heiress. Okay, when I think of heiress, I think of Paris Hilton and someone who gets billions of dollars, right? Not a company that has a parentheses around it. And not only that, I did not inherit anything. I bought Stuckey's with my life savings. And let me show you what I bought. I bought a rented warehouse, or I'll say distribution center. It sounds so much better. In Eastman, Georgia, with a double-wide trailer as an office. And this was my first day on the job as CEO right after I signed the purchase papers. And so I was like, I'll go through all the inventory and see what we've got. Well, we had over a decade of inventory that had not turned. So I'm not a supply chain expert, but I figure if it hasn't sold in a decade, it's pretty bad. So we had about 6 cases of Britney Spears t-shirts. Thank God she made a comeback. Sold all of those at a profit. So we also had those cowboy hats. I made these things called mystery boxes, and I pulled them together, and I sold them online for $34.99. We sold 800 of them in 3 months and made a profit of $40,000 out of $9,000 of dead inventory. So that's part of reinventing the brand, right? And this is what people remember. This is what Stephanie's mother would have remembered on those wonderful family vacations. So this is the reality of what I bought. At our peak, we had 368 stores in 40 states. We had a billboard company. We had 4,000 billboards on every major interstate in the US. And by the time I got the company, there were only 13 original Stuckeys still standing, and most of them look like this. So this one looked so bad that when I went on a road trip to visit the 13 original stores, I did not want to have a close-up. So there I am, right up front, and I'm like, look at this cool pencil of Oklahoma instead of looking at this garish Stuckey's that is painted the wrong color. So that's the 13 stores. And then we also have 68 licensed locations. So they were franchises, and I found out, the lawyers in the room will appreciate this, we have been out of compliance with federal franchise laws for over a decade. So I had to clean up that mess. And so we have 16 of these locations. They're now licensed, and a lot of them look like this. That does not look like the other Stuckeys I just showed you, right? That doesn't look like that. So that's what I got. And then this is the interior of the stores, right? Anyone who remembers going into a Stuckey's as a kid, that's not what they look like. Look at that branding. That is like terrible 80s branding that somebody's nephew did at the print shop. That's what I bought, right? But here's why I did it. After I met with Paul and I met with Dan and really smart people, and Paul helped me realize you look for what's not on the balance sheet, right? What I bought was what Stephanie talked about in her intro. I bought a trademark. I bought a brand. I bought the history of the road trip. I bought amazing vacation memories because I road tripped like all of you, and I pulled over at Stuckey's, and I was the kid in the back of the car because I'm number 4 of 5 kids in my immediate family, and I'm the one who stayed in the back because we didn't have air conditioning back there. And I did this with the trucks that came by. I remembered all that, and I thought there's enough people who remember that and who love the road trip that this brand is worth saving. But here's the most important thing. This is why I really did it. I loved my grandfather, and I didn't want his legacy to be faded ghost stores on the side of the highway, fading memories of vacations long gone. That was not how our story ended. And I looked into it, and I think I'm right. And if there's somebody else out there with a story like ours, I want to meet them. I don't know any other brand that was founded by a wonderful visionary founder, sold off to corporate America, and I'm not anti-corporate America, but in this case it did not work. Sold to corporate America, and the family got it back. We got it back. So I want to say you can do that. You can get your brand back, and you can save your company. So that's why I did it. So I'm going to tell you very briefly, and then we'll bring Paul up and we can talk a little bit more about how I did it. But I'll tell you what my grandfather did and how we got to that moment when I got the phone call. My grandfather started Stuckey's 1937 during the Great Depression. He had to drop out of the University of Georgia School of Law, and he had to go farm cotton, which he hated. So he started selling pecans because how many of you know that Georgia's not the peach state? We're number 3 in peaches. We are number 1 in pecans, and we have been since the 1950s. And I say pecan, but because most people say pecan, I say pecan now. I've heard every joke about pecan. But he started selling pecans on the side of the road, and then my grandmother came up with this recipe for a pecan log roll, and before you know it, he had a store. And we really were the first roadside retail chain. Before there was TA or Love's or Buc-ee's, there was Stuckey's. He invented that, and he had a manufacturing plant, and he learned how to package, and throughout his career, I learned all this when I bought the company because my grandfather sold Stuckey's a year before I was born. So I only knew him as Big Daddy. I'm from the South. He was married to Big Mama. I knew him as Big Daddy. So I didn't know this history, but during World War II, he had to pivot, Stephanie. He actually sold candy to the troops too, because that's the only way he could survive. He had to shutter all his stores, and he was able to get sugar, because if you worked for the government, you could get sugar. And so he learned how to package as a result, he learned how to manufacture as a result, he learned how to scale, and he pivoted. He completely changed his business model to survive. And when the war ended, he started his stores again. And he had dozens of stores and was very successful. And then he had to pivot again because the U.S. highway system came along and bypassed all of his stores. And instead of going bankrupt and shutting his doors like many businesses along Lincoln Highway and Route 66 and the Dixie Highway did, this is what he did. He embraced the change. I love this postcard I found. Traveling on beautiful Interstate 70. I have been on I-70. I don't know about you. It is not beautiful. But he used it as an opportunity. He said, I'm going to pivot. I'm going to reinvent myself. And I'm going to save my company. And so he changed his stores because they look like this. Architecturally, they were all over the map. And he came up with a consistent branding that really defined Stuckey's as the roadside oasis. By the way, he got a sweetheart deal with Texaco Gas. He got 4 cents per gallon, every gallon sold, which made him a millionaire. He was a very shrewd businessman for someone who had to drop out of school. And I'll end with his story before I get to what happened. With the most important thing to me is that he had values, he had a purpose. And the purpose was every traveler is a friend. And I carry that with me to this day. And it's not just road trippers, it's travelers through life. And our brand has always been a welcoming oasis on the side of the highway. So that photo is from the movie The Green Book, because during the era of Jim Crow, Stuckey's was one of the few places that was never segregated. So we have always been a welcoming oasis. And I found this photo, someone sent it to me actually. That is Sid Vicious with the Sex Pistols. He is buying a chili dog at a Stuckey's in Tennessee on their 1978 world tour. So from punk rockers to African Americans during the period of segregation to Truman Capote used to always stop at Stuckey's and feed his prized English bulldogs Stuckey's chili dogs. So all are welcome at Stuckey's. Every traveler is a friend, and that is our purpose. Here's what happened to us. Paul mentioned it. We sold to Pet Dairy Corporation. The Arab oil embargo happened. Airfare Harold Beavis became affordable, very good for Delta, not good for us road tripping brands. And then Pet got bought out by a series of corporations. We spiraled. They did not get a quirky Southern brand that sold pecan log rolls and rubber alligators. And they sold off our real estate, sold off the stores, trashed the brand. My dad got the company back in the 1980s. He was running Interstate Dairy Queen. He had the franchise rights to all the Dairy Queen stores on the interstate highway system. That was a very lucrative business. And then he got Stuckey's back because litigation, thank God for lawyers. There were all these lawsuits by franchisees who were very upset with how the company was being run. The railroad conglomerate didn't want it. They basically gave it to my dad. My dad's like, what do I do with this? And so he just literally stuck Stuckey's next to his Dairy Queen stores. I was in college, and I love my father very much, but I remember saying, Dad, what are you doing? You're taking away the turquoise roof. You're taking away the brand. And he's like, the Stuckey's brand isn't going to sell. Nobody remembers it. It's been trashed. Dairy Queen's where it's at. We disagreed on that. But he kept Stuckey's alive, thank God. So fast forward 25 years, he sells Dairy Queen, his Dairy Queen business, to this man, Warren Buffett, who owns American Dairy Queen. But guess what? Warren Buffett didn't want to buy Stuckey's. The Oracle of Omaha passed on that one, right, Paul? So that leads to the person who did buy it. So a decade after my dad sold Dairy Queen, all the infrastructure that had been supporting Stuckey's for 25 years, it was propped up by Dairy Queen. It had never been profitable. So the skeletal remains, literally, of Stuckey's was spiraling downward with no CEO, no marketing budget, and we were $166,000 in debt when I decided I was going to buy it. And how did I turn it around? I found the healthy business inside the unhealthy one, and I learned from my grandfather. I learned to pivot. And he turned his company around during World War II through manufacturing. So that's what I did. So I got a business partner who is actually a cousin of mine. He's a third-generation pecan farmer. We went back to our roots, started as a pecan stand. So we bought a pecan processing plant in Rennes, Georgia. We bought a candy plant. We have great pecans, are delicious, and banana pudding, President Blake. I'm just saying, putting that out there for you. And so we started manufacturing again. And we redid our branding. I think it looks much better than that terrible 80s design. And the logo is my grandfather's signature. So it's very much an homage to him. And look what a difference design makes. That is the packaging when I bought the company. Our hunky-dory package on the left looks like dog poo. They even got the date of our founding wrong. They said since 1928, they got the date wrong. So we rebranded. And then it's all about the road trip. I don't care if we are selling pecan log rolls in a Stuckey store or if we're selling pecan log rolls in your grocery store. We are still all about exploring America. Does anyone know where this is, by the way? It's one of my favorite roadside attractions. It's Catoosa, Oklahoma. It's the Catoosa Blue Whale. And there I am at a boiled peanut stand in Dodge County, Georgia, my hometown, wearing a Capricorn Records shirt. So I started posting about my journey on social media. I went from about 500 LinkedIn followers to I'm almost at 100,000, and I have gotten almost every single major account through LinkedIn with no marketing budget. You're looking at the CEO and the Chief Marketing Officer. And it paid off. I got on the front page of the Sunday New York Times. Talking about me doing business was crazy, and then I really love that. Now at family reunions, I'm like, yeah, look at the eco-wacko tree hugger. And I'm actually going from here to a Today Show taping. So, and none of that, we don't have a PR. It's just telling the story of this amazing brand. And we're expanding to grocery channels, so that's really what's driving our sales. We're now in Ingalls, we're now in Food Lion, we're about to be in a couple of others that I can't say just yet, but it's super, super exciting. I think I can say, Maria, just don't put this in print. We're going to be in Wawa soon. I can't wait. I love Wawa. And so I'm carrying on my grandfather's legacy. So that's him on the left, that's me on the right, and we're going to keep growing. So at this point, I think, Paul, hopefully I didn't go too over. I did 85 years of history in a few minutes. So. And those of you who have to go, grab a pecan log roll. Look for them in a store near you.
Pretty good, huh? Great story, great. So I want to ask a few questions just to kind of kick things off, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor and hope that you all can opine on some of your own thoughts here. But let me jump back to something you started with kind of there at the end, and that's that relationship between you and your dad and your grandfather. And it's very clear in the midst of all this excitement and vibrancy you're bringing back to the Stuckey's brand, and the fact that you've been able to essentially turn the P&Ls and the bottom line back to positive in less than 3 years, 2.5 years, is extraordinary, right? Especially given the unrivaled cutthroat marketplace that you're in the candy business. Talk to us a little bit, if you would, about the difference between your dad and your granddad, and how, if at all, that plays into your thinking about being the CEO of a legacy corporation.
Absolutely, and I forgot to say the best part when you mentioned turning the company around. So we closed out, I bought Stuckey's November 2019. So we closed out 2019, $166,000 in debt with right at $2 million gross sales. We closed out 2021 with $12.5 million in sales, $2.5 million profit. So 2 years. So it's working. It's working. I think the difference is that I embrace being able to change the business model. And I absolutely love my father. And people ask me all the time, like, how do you and your dad get along? How did you manage taking over Stuckey's from him? And my answer is not one that's satisfying to people who want to figure out that family dynamic. How I did it was I bought out my father. And I actually sat down with him because initially I bought out his business partners. They owned 49%. So I had 49%, my dad had 51%. And we worked like that for 6 months. And when I started turning a profit, we were only 10,000 profitable, but we were still profitable. Within 6 months, I sat my dad down and I said, you can have a daughter or you can have a business partner. Choose. And he didn't decide right away, but my mother interceded. And a week later, he's like, your mother's driving me crazy. You can buy me out. And I bought him out. So that's really how we made that dynamic work. Now we get along great. He calls me every morning at 5 a.m. to make sure I'm up and working. And he gives me great advice that I don't have to take. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I think the difference is my father had a very set business strategy for Stuckey's, for Dairy Queen, and he wanted to apply Stuckey's to what he already had going. And I think he wanted to prove his own business. And I, coming in without a business background, in a way, I think is my best asset. I'm a big believer in turning your vulnerabilities into your strengths. And my naivete was my biggest strength because nobody else wanted to buy Stuckey's. And they were smart. They were making the smart business decision. I made a decision from the heart, from the gut, because I believed in the brand. And it was that belief in the branding that motivates me every single day. And my dad was thinking more about business. So he didn't have to do any branding because he bought a brand. He bought Dairy Queen. So none of that was anything he did. But when you buy your family's business, you are in charge of the branding. So I'm passionate about the branding, which is why I got a business partner who's passionate about the operations and helping with all of the negotiations. I do the sales pitches, and he does the closers. So you got to have that
let's
balance.
talk about that branding and the pitch. You multiple slides talked about the road trip.
Yeah.
And the nostalgia and the excitement that's kind of rebirthed in that in the last 5 to 10 years. And even in the midst of this crazy gas crisis, people are driving more than they've ever driven, right? And clearly, we just are coming out of a pandemic that could have had catastrophic effects. You've turned your company around in the midst of that. Unpack for us a little bit. What's really going on with the road trip? Why is it important, and what does it mean to your brand?
I think it's comforting. I think people like to have the freedom of getting in their cars and exploring America. And I'm not talking just about the safety. Obviously, I think there's a safety aspect to being contained in your own vehicle. But there's just a joy and a fun to getting on the road and pulling over and exploring small town America. And there are a lot of people out there who just love that. And the great thing about the road trip, people ask me all the time, well, what's your strategy for millennials? What's your strategy for Gen Zers? How are you going to carry on to the next generation? And I say, we're about the road trip. Our brand is making road trips fun. And that's ageless. That defies all demographics. I meet people all the time, different ages, different sexes, different everything, and they enjoy exploring America and they enjoy that freedom. And the one thing that when I'm in meetings talking to people and they say, well, I don't like the road trip or I don't like pecans, then I'll just tell them, you're not our people. And that's okay. Like, not everyone has to love Stuckey's. There are millions of people in the world. There's millions of customers. So I don't have to have every single segment of the market. I just have to have enough to sell enough pecan log rolls to someday own and operate a handful of those stores again, because I absolutely want to bring back like 5 or 6 of those stores.
So I sense a lot of excitement and passion about the road trip and really tapping into that. But putting my business hat on and being the person that you look to ask the hard questions about that stuff, I noticed you're making your profit off your distribution and sales.
Yeah.
Almost as a production warehousing wholesaler versus the old time when your grandfather and your dad were doing it at the roadside stand, doing it at the Stuckey's, capturing 4 cents a gallon on gas. We'd all take that deal today. How do you juggle that? And what do you do when people say, why are you even wasting your time on the roadside when your money and your profits are in the distribution?
Well, this was in the New York Times article. It's like Corona, the beer. They're all about the beach. So if you listen to Jimmy Buffett, if you're a parrot head, that's all about Key West and enjoying that lifestyle. So it doesn't matter if you're in a suburban mall in Cincinnati and you're buying a Corona or you're buying a Hawaiian shirt, you still get the sense of being at the beach. So I want people to associate our brand with the road trip, whether you're on a road trip or not. Now, having said that, I do have a goal of someday owning a handful of stores that would be very much destination stores, brand forward, that would tell the story of the road trip and celebrate that. But before I get there, I have to sell a lot more pecan log rolls. That's the reality. But here's the other thing. When I was looking at my grandfather's papers, so that was one of the best things I got 6 boxes of his archives. So the first 6 months after buying the company, I spent every single night reading his papers. And he went from being Big Daddy to being Stuckey, the self-made millionaire. And I learned how he really made his money was selling product. It was kind of like the Chick-fil-A model. Like, he never owned or operated any of the stores. They were husband and wife teams who lived in the stores. They owned the stores. He made all of his money from the sale of product, which is what we're doing. Now, we're having to go to third-party retailers because of reality. Now, if somebody always asks me, every single day, when are you going to revive the stores? I'm like, you want to give me $10 million per store? Because that's what it's going to cost to build and operate a roadside stand or roadside operation now.
So one last question, then I want to open the floor to folks to ask yours. You kind of alluded to some steps your grandfather took and that you're now taking to control supply chain. Right, we're in the midst of a supply chain crisis, and I loved the photograph of your grandfather and all the staff with this fleet of trucks behind them, and you standing in the plant as the pecans, as I've learned to say it, are rolling off the line, and the warehouse full of product that you're getting distributed. How important is that supply chain, and what's the difference that you're trying to navigate so that you can be better at supply chain management? Do you want to control the whole chain, or are you partnering? And what do partnerships look like when you've got a storied brand like Stuckey's that you're trying to protect?
That's a great question. Yes, so we are doing our best to control as much supply chain as possible. We source 100% of our pecans from Georgia pecan farmers. We're in the process of trying to work with a co-op to have a locked-in fixed agreement where we're just sourcing 100% from this co-op for a fixed period of time. So we're hopefully getting to a reliable supply at a reliable price. So that's a big deal for us. But as much as possible, we're sourcing all of our ingredients and all of our packaging and all of our display material and all of our signage is sourced from Georgia companies or mostly in the Southeast, but 100% American. So we found that's made it a lot easier for us to control the supply. Having said that, we're having a lot of issues right now scaling. Everyone likes to talk about startups. They don't talk about scale-ups. And scaling is the hardest thing. And I told Paul before I came up here during lunch that I had the worst executive team meeting I've had in 2 years today, where they basically told me, Stephanie, will you quit marketing Stuckey's? Will you quit selling product? We cannot manage the production. We cannot keep up with the production. And when I told them I was going on the Today Show, I thought they'd be excited. They're like, no, don't go on the Today Show. You can't talk about it. And I'm like, we got to sell product. They're like, we got to make product. So I literally may be working the candy line, doing an I Love Lucy, which I have done. I have worked the candy line just to keep up with production. So we're doing our best. We have all the problems everyone else has with supply chain. I see Stephanie standing, so I'm thinking that might be my cue.
Well, I'm thinking we're probably going to have some questions from the audience, and I want to take a minute to get to those. Does anyone have a question for Stephanie? Yes.
Hey, Stephanie.
Hey.
Being the sustainability person that you are you going to have electric charging stations at your stores?
So I get that question a lot. I drive an electric vehicle. There's a lot of challenges. We do not own or operate our stores. A lot of our store operators do not own their property, so it's leased. And so the upfront cost of EV charging infrastructure is pretty expensive. It's not just the actual equipment, but it's also the permitting. It's getting, I'm sure there's somebody here from Georgia Power, but it's getting the utility hookup, it's paying for the utility hookup, it's making sure you have sufficient parking that you're willing to have tied up for 40 minutes or longer. And you contrast that, and there's only about 5% of the market right now that drive EVs. You contrast that with oil and gas, where the petroleum companies, the gas companies, they pay for the gas pumps, the tanks, the infrastructure, the permitting, the signage, the canopies. They even buy T-shirts that say BP Oil or Sunoco or whatever. They pay for all of that. And so we're dealing not with the large operators, we're dealing with folks who own 1 to 5 stores. And I tell them they're basically buying themselves a job when you own a C-store on the interstate. The margins are that tight. So I go and tell them, you need to invest $50,000 to $100,000 in EV charging for 5% of the market when you're used to the oil and gas company paying for everything up front. And they say, I'll pass. The only one I've gotten to work is Tesla pays for all the charging infrastructure. They will do the permitting, they do everything. But you have to be on their charging route. So I worked with Tesla. It took me a year and a half. We got EV charging for Tesla. It is a proprietary charger, so it only works for Tesla. But we do have it at 2 stores. I spent untold hours on that. And how much money I actually generated for the company through all that effort, not a lot. But I'm trying. It's hard. It's really hard.
Clark, I'm sorry.
Ask about generation.
Jeff.
Business professor. And H.L. Mencken had a saying, and Scottish people do everywhere they talk about shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. There's an entrepreneur, 2nd generation builds. By 3rd generation, people want to get lazy. In your case, you're not, but what about the next generation? You're one of 7, so I imagine your grandfather has a lot of great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
Are any of them showing interest in the business? Is there a way you can inspire them to show interest?
Great question. And I'm a big advocate for the 3Gers or the 3rd gens, whatever you want to say, because we get a bad rap. We're usually the ones who screw it up. And I'd like to say we don't all screw it up. And there's actually a really fun 3G club I've gotten to know on LinkedIn. So we're out there and we're kicking butt. I serve on Bealls department store chain, by the way. I'm on their board, and they're being run by the 3rd generation, by Matt Bell. So that's pretty cool. And Radio Flyer is being run by a 3rd gen, Robert Passon, who's super cool. So we don't all screw it up. The 4th generation, I have a nephew, my sister's son, who operates 2 Stuckey stores. So he is a licensee, and absolutely, I could see him coming up in the business. And then my kids, what I've been telling them is, you may not run Stuckey's, but you will own. They'll each own a quarter of it. So you have to understand the business. So I'm trying not to force it on them, but at the same time, I'm making them very aware that they are being handed a precious gift, and they better not screw it up. Yeah, because it's just, I'm trying to teach them, and it's hard because I got into this late in life. I think the reason I'm so passionate about it was that I had to work for it. I had to pay for it.
So, Stephanie, it's one of the things that struck me in the article and growing up around Stuckey's and, my family loving it is one of the things that I think you have done is revive the authenticity and the kind of the kitschiness of the character, that kind of unique spirit, which I think translates well to young people as well. Is that something that you will continue to to drive, as this kind of quirkiness that's the Stuckey's brand, and how will that show up in other projects?
Absolutely, great question. I mean, I think when you are small and scrappy and you're a comeback, you have to figure out what's your distinguishing factor. How are we different from Love's and TA and Pilot? And I stop at all those places. And I actually think of them as collaboration because every single one of them can sell our product. And TA is selling our log rolls, by the way. But I try to think, how are we different? And they all have the same distributor. It's a company called Linko, and it's all the same product. So as much as possible, I'm trying to make sure that we have something that's unique, that's special, that's a distinguishing factor. And my goal, I'm not going to say when I own and operate a handful of Stuckey's, is that they will reflect a sense of place. My grandfather did this. He had consistency in design. The architecture was the same. The quality was the same. But the experience in the store was different. So if you went to a Stuckey's in Florida, there was one that was right near a fishing hole. You could buy bait and tackle and get your fishing license there. If you were in Texas, you buy the 10-gallon hats. And so you had a sense of place and specialness. And so absolutely, I think it's important for us to say what makes us different. So not only were we the first roadside retail chain, but we are known for selling ashtrays shaped like toilets to say, put your butts here. And so you got to embrace that. We actually do sell ashtrays shaped like toilets that say, put your butts here. And I remember being totally embarrassed when I saw that. And I called my vice president buying, and I'm like, what the hell are we selling? And he said, welcome to your roadside empire, princess. So,
Well, if
Yeah.
there's anything we have learned in the past several years is that we all need to maintain a good sense of humor.
That's right.
So anything that can make us laugh, I'm all for. So we, unless there's a burning question with someone
I just got
else.
one more. Certainly,
President
thank
Blake.
you for your presentation. I'll tell
Yes.
you, I resonate so much. I didn't get on my first airplane until I was in my 20s, so all of our vacations were road tripping and 100 Stuckey's stops. So one thing that, though, coming back to the state, I actually road trip again to see legislators around the state. But going to like Albany and Macon and Metter, all these places have changed the way they look. You know, they don't feel like a road trip town anymore, a stop through anymore. So how do you juxtapose kind of how the landscape has changed? And it kind of goes to kind of what you're describing as far as the millenniums, but it feels like the real estate is so different now. And you know, anything you can suggest on that side.
well, we should go on a road trip together. I can show you the fun
do
places.
it.
But it's the interstate. When the interstate came along, you went from having the wigwam village and the giant teapot-shaped coffee shop and all these fun roadside Americana places to the chains. And I have to say, Stuckey's adapted and became a chain, but my grandfather still fought against that by curating these fun and interesting souvenirs and making it an experience. So the way to get off of the monotonous characteristics of the highway experience these days is to take the back roads. And there are so many fun places in Georgia, like the Peanut Museum in Tifton. Have you been there? It's the world's largest peanut. It was in Ashburn, Georgia, but it got toppled. But Ashburn has the Crime and Punishment Museum that is fascinating. So there are amazing places to explore, and I love things like motels. One of the best motels in the country, consistently rated one of the best motels by USA Today, is the Thunderbird Inn in Savannah, the T-Bird, which is a retro motel with this beautiful neon sign. See, people are nodding their heads. Do you know the only original Taco Bell sign is in Savannah, Georgia? That's really cool to me. So you just have to kind of know where to look for this. And so I'm now in all these geeky road trip Americana groups, and we share information. So I'm in a neon group, I'm in a motel group, I'm in a diner group. So wherever I go anywhere, you know where to go. Like, I just got back from Montgomery, Alabama, and I sat on the bar stool where Hank Williams Sr. wrote, "Hey, good looking, what you got cooking?" It's in Chris's Diner in downtown Montgomery. That same diner, by the way, has the Styx booth because Tommy Shaw from Styx used to hang out there. So that stuff is fun, and it's everywhere. You just have to know where to look for it. Right down the street is the first Waffle House, by the way, which is a Waffle House museum. That's an American icon, and it's in our neighborhood.
Well, thanks a lot. I'm from Savannah, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, please join me in thanking Paul Morris for moderating and Stephanie Stuckey. If you did not get your pecan roll, please do so on the way out, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.